There are large swaths of this country where local option is not an option, but it is in Kentucky. And it does seem that this question has failed on numerous occasions. Are we trying to persuade a reluctant electorate this time around in 2007, or do we think they see those changes that you've talked about?
Well, we've only asked this question that we're asking on November 6th. That's only been asked one time before. All previous votes before 2000 were about a wet drive, where we would have package stores, where we would have taverns, a totally wet community. And I am absolutely opposed to that, and I would work as hard or harder against us being a wet community than I am as a limited sales community. But in 2000, we were the first community in the state, if not the first, one of the first two, to vote using the new statutes that have been introduced in the legislature. Why now is because since 2000, this list of communities that I read off to you, again, Murray, Moorhead, Danville, Harrodsburg, Georgetown, LaGrange, Franklin, London, Elizabethtown, have all voted to allow limited sales in their communities. And that has changed the competitive playing field for our community in terms of economic development.
Go ahead, Walter.
Right, I understand that they've all voted there, and I don't live in any of those communities. Steve doesn't either. I do know some people in the communities, but every community is unique.
Right.
Every community has its own strengths and weaknesses. I saw something about competitiveness in the paper today, and yet I look at Horse Cave, dry as a bone, between out toward Hiceville and on north. Dart, grown tremendously, and is sitting there, as I understand it, facing at least a 400 job expansion. Marzetti, T. Marzetti's, Sister Schubert's. These are all companies that have come to an absolutely dry community. And the issue there wasn't wet or dry. It's workforce and infrastructure and incentives. It's my understanding that the Caveland Environmental Authority that does sewer and water in that area did a tremendous job providing incentives for T. Marzetti. Those are the things. And transportation. Dart's on a railroad right off the interstate. You look at E-Town is in such a tremendously good position from every state, at the intersection of 4 major toll roads.
And I wanted to ask about that, Steve. I mean, how much of a factor is this? Glasgow, if you look at Glasgow and Barron County historically, we've been kind of a center, but over time we allowed what became Western to leave, the railway spur became only a spur, and I-65 bypassed us, which were probably in those days the biggest thing. How often do you hear about this when you're talking to people?
Well, I look back on the history of our community, and just to clarify a little bit about what you're talking about, if you look at the history of economic development, transportation has been the key component to that. So river towns, followed by railroad towns, followed by interstate towns. Glasgow, by its design, had none of those. The river, we had no navigable waterway that we could depend on. The railroad bypassed us, but we had a group of leaders in our community that said we can't get left off the railroad. So they paid private funds to build our connection to connect to the North-South Railway. I-65, our community was in a position to be able to leverage political influence. If you draw a straight line from Elizabethtown to Bowling Green, it does not go through Cave City. It goes on the west side of Mammoth Cave National Park. But we had enough political influence that pulled it around this horseshoe bend that it takes at Cave City and Park City before going due west to Bowling Green. And obviously Governor Nunn, when he was there, was very instrumental with the Cumberland Parkway being built. We have had people that have said, despite the limitations that we have to be progressive and reach out. The hospital has been a star among our crown. What T.J. Sampson Hospital does for us. But Ronnie, we're losing our role as a regional hub. And we're losing that because people are just skipping over Glasgow and going directly to Warren County to dine or to shop or to seek employment. And Walter, to answer your question about T. Marzetti, DART was an expansion of existing industry, and we've been able to benefit from that. T. Marzetti and Sister Schubert's are the same company. Horse Cave, Hart County did a great job with a particular tax incentive program that Barron County is not eligible for. And one could further take it and say that the community of Caverna, which Horse Cave and Cave City are tied very closely with one another, Cave City does have sales there, so they simply have to drive to the other end of town. But I don't want to say that it's a panacea. I am not saying that if we have restaurant sales, limited sales in restaurants, that everything's going to be perfect. It is a component, but it is a key component.
Well, and thanks to the good offices of Sheila Hogue and the Electric Plant Board, I've got some statistics from some of those communities you named. They do all show an increase in jobs. They're not huge increases. They tend to be small percentages. But I think the question that someone with Walter's perspective on this question might have is what kind of jobs are those? Are those not going to be disproportionately service jobs?
Well, when we talk about jobs creation, someone said, I don't think the restaurant jobs are really worth it. The service jobs are certainly a facet of creating restaurants and opportunities. But the way that we grow the higher income jobs, the way that our community grows, the way that we attract these manufacturing jobs or these service industries that pay in the 15+ per hour wage, is that we have an adequate labor pool and we're seen as a community that's growing as opposed to a community that's regressing. Right now, we are not, Dr. Ron Crouch at the University of Louisville says that our community, without an influx of people, we are going to start losing population. So our community we're at a crossroads right now. We're at a real critical crossroads about what our future is going to be. And yes, you would initially have some of the service jobs, but then it would bring the manufacturing jobs, the professional jobs, the engineering jobs. Those are the type jobs that this would enable us to further recruit to the community.
I want to come back to that, but I wanted to ask Walter, and you can respond to what Steve has just said. But when Steve says our community is, and I don't remember the adjective he used, but we seem to be stuck in the status quo over the past few years a little bit. I do hear that a lot in the community. I don't know if this is the solution to it, but how do you respond to that?
Well, let me say two things. For any community to succeed in industrial development, it takes, one of the key components that it takes is strong and aggressive leadership. Leaders that will get out and go to Frankfurt and do the things that need to be done to encourage people to come in this direction. Now, Steve mentioned the hospital. I've been on the hospital board more years than I want to remember. And we do have a magnificent hospital facility for a community this size. We employ more than 1,000 people. And I've served with now 3 excellent administrators, Glenn Joyner, Dwayne Moss, and Bill Kendrick. One of our biggest challenges is to challenge or to recruit these high-paid professionals in the medical community, not necessarily in the hospital, but the doctors that make up the medical community. And yes, there have been times I wish there was, I could have a drink here. But that wasn't the issue as to whether we got them or whether we didn't get them. We have lost those people primarily because of other communities and other hospitals offering them more. And the ones that we have persuaded, and sometimes it's been persuasion to come here, in most instances the primary issues are business issues. Salary, compensation, coverage, huge issue. And things that mean something, can they have time with their family that can mean something there. The other, and this is where Steve and we can argue, he can say it's a significant issue. I think it's a minor issue in any of these areas because all of the economic issues and those issues, I think, are the most important issues for economic development.
We'll give both of you a chance to talk about this a little more, but for right now, we're going to take a break for our commercial